Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
Moldova and those places, no. Bulgaria, Romania, no.
Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia.
Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia.
Who else wants to come in?
Ukraine, no?
Then there are the Central European states, Hungary.
Czech Republic.
And there's always one that eludes, isn't there?
Slovenia, Slovakia. Are they two separate places?
Cyprus.
Malta wants to join.
Macedonia? No.
And Poland, of course, the biggest of them.
Europe is on the brink of a profound change. 10 countries are about to become new members of the European Union. From May onwards, the EU will have over 100 million new citizens, and the political and economic geography of Europe will be transformed. It's a new dawn for the EU, and a time of great expectation for the countries about to join. One of these countries is Slovenia, and this is its capital city, Ljubljana. Ljubljana is a popular tourist destination for Slovenia's neighbours, Austria and Italy. It's a small country, roughly the size of Wales, with a population of just under 2 million people. Slovenia was always the wealthiest and most open of the Yugoslav republics. It was the first to gain independence and is the only one to be joining the EU at this time. As war raged across many of the former Yugoslavian countries, Slovenia remained untouched. Instead, it looked to strengthen its ties with its neighbours in Central and Western Europe. Slovenes are largely enthusiastic about their country's accession into the EU, and 89% of the electorate voted yes.
Well, I voted for yes, so it was a yes.
I vote against. I vote for Europe, of course, and because there is no other way for Slovenians, I think.
So how long has Slovenia been preparing for EU membership?
One could say that Slovenia has been preparing for the EU ever since its independence, because the vote for independence was also sort of vote for Europe.
Do you think Slovenia joining the EU is a good thing or a bad thing?
I think in general it's a good thing.
But maybe for some of them it's going to be difficult, especially farmers.
The prices will go up.
For us, for youth, it's a good thing because we'll be able to study abroad.
We are no longer treated as a third-rate citizens of the Europe.
History is being made in the Republic of Lithuania this weekend, with the first multi-party elections in the Soviet Union since 1917. Tomorrow, the 3.5 million voters of
Lithuania regained its independence in 1990 after 50 years of foreign rule. The other two Baltic states, Latvia and Estonia, won their independence a year later. Ireland had the upper hand when pitted against Lithuania and Latvia in the World Cup qualifying campaign in the early 90s. But while we won't be going to Euro 2004, Latvia has qualified for the first time.
The Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia are absolutely fascinating countries, and they're not at all what I expected them to be like. They are far more sophisticated than I would have imagined. They're very like Scandinavian countries, which is what they used to be before the Russians came in. They had enormous difficulty getting the Russians to leave. And they're terrified that the Russians are going to come back. And they don't want this. And joining the EU and joining NATO is vitally important to them as a buffer, as a protection.
3 more new members will be Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. Hungary has a population of just over 10 million. Its capital, Budapest, straddles the famous Danube River. As communism crumbled across Central and Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia split peacefully into Slovakia and the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic's historic capital, Prague, is a major European tourist destination.
These are countries which have been part of the European heritage and part of European civilization, but have been cut off from the rest of us for years by rusting barbed wire and by Soviet tanks.
I remember many years ago there was a Czech delegation who went to the European Parliament, and one of the speakers there said to the Czech delegation, "Welcome to Europe." And they said, "Well, actually, we've been here all the time." The Czechs have a certain self-confidence. They know that their economy is up to it and that they can become a real force within the European Union. And that's what I like about the idea of enlargement, because you have more of these states coming in who are not afraid to stand up to the mighty French and the mighty Germans.
The Mediterranean islands of Cyprus and Malta stand out from the pack of former Iron Curtain countries, and they are amongst the smallest of the newcomers. Malta attracts more than 1 million tourists every year.
Malta is a very interesting case, because Malta is like Ireland, a country that was a British colony or dominion or whatever you want to call it. Apart from Maltese, English is their language of communication. I think we're going to find that, in fact, the Irish and the Maltese, although we're quite, we're island nations that quite removed from one another, we're going to have a lot in common.
Cyprus is also a popular sunspot, but it's a divided island. The northern part of Cyprus was occupied by Turkey in 1974. The standoff between the Greek Cypriots in the south and the Turkish Cypriots in the north continues to this day, although travel restrictions were lifted in 2003.
We hope in the case of Cyprus that accession to the European Union will help to end the antagonisms in Cyprus and will help to solve the dispute in Cyprus.
This enlargement is a bold move and a historic moment, because Europe is coming full circle. Divided by the Iron Curtain in the aftermath of the Second World War, it's about to be united again under the European Union. And what we now call the European Union owes its origins to the conflict that was World War II and the determination that Europe should never go to war again. Following the devastation of World War II, key European political figures argued that the only way to secure lasting peace was to forge economic and political bonds between the former adversaries. Europe divided into East and West. Central and Eastern Europe disappeared behind the Iron Curtain, while Western countries forged ahead with a new agenda. In 1951, 6 countries came together to establish the European Coal and Steel Community. They were France, West Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, Holland and Belgium. They later incorporated other sectors of the economy and established the European Economic Community, or EEC. The EEC had its first enlargement in 1973 when 3 more nations joined. Like Slovenia, one of these new members was a small country, Ireland.
Ireland ended up poorer at the end of 1958 than it was at the beginning. And to be able to do that at a time when the whole of Europe, Western Europe, had what the economic historians call a golden period of growth. Everyone else, all the other ships were rising, and we were not. And it meant that we really had to shift. We had to change our domestic economic policies and the way we interacted with the rest of the world.
Ireland first applied for membership of the EEC in 1961, but it would be over a decade before a referendum was held to decide if we wanted to join.
There was an inevitable move towards a trade bloc in Europe, and you either had to be in it or not in it. And that was the kind of attitude, I think, adopted by the yes vote. That was hugely important for the future of Ireland, that we should be involved.
I was about 6 years old, and I can remember there was sort of months and months where all over Dublin, everywhere you went, there were signs: vote yes, vote no. The vote no people tended to put their slogans up on bridges and walls, and they were daubed in white paint all over Dublin. And because I knew that it was sort of a bad thing to paint on walls, I had decided that the vote yes were right and the vote no were wrong. So that was really as much of it as I grasped. And I have to say, 30 years later, probably haven't really grasped that much more about it.
Those who were opposed to it were opposed on the basis that it would inevitably cause job losses, and it would dilute sovereignty. But they didn't carry weight because I think the huge momentum for change had begun and it was irresistible.
The yes side won with over 8 out of 10 voters supporting accession, and Taoiseach Jack Lynch went to Brussels to join the leaders of Great Britain and Denmark for the signing of the first EEC Enlargement Treaty. The EEC now had 9 members.
The enlargement in 1973 was, I think, by and large, about countries which should have joined from the outset, catching up. What is happening this time represents, I think, the end of the post-war era.
The next enlargement did not take place until 1981, when Greece was welcomed into the fold. The EEC became the EC, and Spain and Portugal joined in 1986. Almost a decade later, Austria, Finland and Sweden brought the group to 15, and it was now called the European Union.
The events of 1989, culminating with the fall of the Berlin Wall, were the most profound series of developments in Europe since the end of the Second World War. The removal of the Iron Curtain allowed Easterners to see their Western neighbours close up for the first time. And they concluded, we want to be like you. We want to share your wealth.
After the fall of communism, the EU was faced with the newly emerging countries wanting to join.
The plain truth is that if we enlarge at the next stage to a union of some 20 or 25 members, we will bust the bank unless we have quite significant policy reform.
By the Madrid summit of 1995, enlargement was on the table, and after much debate, it was decided that each applicant country would be assessed individually. By far the biggest of those countries was Poland. Poland's capital, Warsaw, used to be hailed as the Paris of the North, but the old town here today is only just over 50 years old. It was completely destroyed by the Nazis in World War II and then rebuilt from the foundations with great devotion and attention to detail. In fact, much of Warsaw was reduced to rubble during the war and then rebuilt in the years that followed. In 1940, Warsaw's Jewish population was confined to an overcrowded, walled-off ghetto where thousands starved. The following year, the mass deportation to the death camps began. Almost all of Poland's Jewish population, and roughly 1 million Poles, died in Nazi death camps. The most notorious was located in the south of the country, Auschwitz.
Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to go to Warsaw. And for a long time, I wanted to go to where the Warsaw Ghetto had stood. Because I have a photograph, and I've owned it since I was 12, of a little boy in the ghetto. And I went and put a wreath on the place that he was transported from. And it really, I have to say, it really brought it very intensely to me what Europe is about. It's not about the economy. It's not about directives. It's not about all the things that drive us mad, straight bananas and regulations that don't seem to make any sense. But it's about creating a space where people are at peace with themselves.
After World War II, Poland fell under the Soviet zone of influence. But in the 1980s, the move towards democracy gained momentum, led by a shipyard worker in Gdansk called Lech Walesa and his Solidarity movement. Poland finally regained its independence after free elections were held in 1989. Now, the move from communism to democracy was a massive step, and it's relatively recent. How do you think the country has dealt with the transformation?
Well, young people and people who live in big cities have profited enormously. Then there's also what we call Poland B, that is the smaller towns or the countryside. where people have not profited and now they see what they don't have, so they feel that they have actually lost on all this.
Poland is by far the largest applicant country with a population of almost 39 million people. In preparation for accession into the EU, it had to undergo difficult economic and political reforms. Nevertheless, in the referendum on EU entry, the Poles backed the move by a margin of more than 3-1.
For people like me, it's a positive thing because I'm educated. I've got a good job.
And I think it's a great future for Poland. It's a very good idea because Poland is a part of Europe and Poland should be in EU.
Although all 10 accession countries were eager to join, the process has not been without pain.
They have had to do a lot of restructuring of their economy. They've had to establish accountable institutions, uphold the rule of law, independent judiciary, a functioning market economy, and part of their accession requirements is confirmation that they can deal with the competitive challenges based on objective economic criteria, which membership of the European Union will bring.
There are fears that the political and social reforms demanded by the EU are a case of too much too soon for the new arrivals, and the weight of EU laws and regulations will impede their development.
I think we have to listen to the people from these countries. They have taken a democratic decision that they want to join, and I don't think it's for the western half of the continent to close the door and say, this is much too difficult for you, you're not ready. In a sense, whether they'd be better prepared in 10 years is neither here nor there. It's almost as if they've got to learn to swim in this system, so you might as well just go in. And remember, 1989 to 2004 is quite a long preparatory period. It's not short. So they've been preparing for membership over a very long time.
There is a fear that the accession process has been mostly about bringing their budgets into line, about cutting back on public spending, about privatising many of their public services, and that this will continue within the European Union.
A lot of people, like for instance my parents, are probably afraid of, because they have 10% of my monthly revenue. They don't have, you probably heard of Polish status of health service, which is horrible, so they are really afraid of.
Although Slovenia, one of the best prepared accession countries, is largely enthusiastic about membership, Slovenes still have concerns.
There won't be enough money coming to Slovenia. There will be lots of European products coming to Slovenia, and the prices will go down. Our industry will go down because of the prices.
We have masses of regulation concerning what can and can't be sold on our markets. And we may be imposing more of a regulatory burden on some of these new countries coming in than is appropriate to their stage in economic development.
Polish farmers are afraid of being wiped out. They do have little bits of land. They know that once you get into the EU, you enlarge or die, in every sense of the word, and they're afraid of losing their little patches.
People are worried that they will not be able to compete, particularly farmers or small business. There's also, especially recently, the worry that the big countries, France and Germany, will dictate to us what we have to do, and we won't have our say.
When the going gets tough, the tough get going. This is Poland's Prime Minister Leszek Miller. Last week he survived a helicopter crash. This evening he arrived directly from hospital to fight for Polish voting rights in the EU.
Poland is not yet a full member of the EU, but it made its presence felt at the summit hosted by Italy last December, when it was at the heart of a standoff on voting powers. When it comes to joining the EU, what do the Polish people as a nation bring to the table, do you think?
I think we're quite outspoken, so you will hear our voice on many issues. We even say that where there are two Polish people, there are three different opinions, so we do debate a lot.
In the Nice Treaty negotiations, the Poles and the Spanish won the right to wield a share of the votes almost equivalent to that enjoyed by Germany and France, despite having smaller populations. They strongly resisted a bid by the bigger countries to dilute this power in December, in a row that has delayed the conclusion of negotiations on a new EU constitutional treaty. And because Ireland now holds the presidency of the EU, it is faced with the challenge of working out a compromise. The land that gave us Chopin, Copernicus, Marie Curie and Pope John Paul II is returning to its rightful place at the heart of European affairs. But this new dawn for Poland and other accession countries will also mean change for the current members of the European Union.
I'm sure there is a lot of scepticism and suspicion among Irish people about it. Certainly Ireland is going to lose its privileged status, its sort of little brother status, which it has had for, 25, 30 years. But there are huge opportunities out there. There are huge opportunities in opening markets.
People might well say that it's a nice club as it is and let it be, because we've done extraordinarily well out of it. The threat, I think, that people see is that there are lower costs in a lot of those countries, and it could mean that there will be a transference of lower priced jobs than that.
Some industries that are located here, which are of a comparatively low scale, may locate in some of the accession countries rather than here, and we can counter that by upskilling the type of thing we're doing. But I don't think there's going to be that much direct competition.
It'll be more complex and more difficult for everyone to have their voice and their say. And therefore, the argument I would make is that a small state must be a very smart state. So we can't ignore what's happening. We must be prepared for it and ensure that our voice is heard.
What you will have now is, I think, the countries like Ireland, these kind of more marginal countries, will actually outnumber the bigger countries. And I think that's got to be good for us.
The 10 accession countries will be formally welcomed into the European Union at a gala ceremony in Dublin's Phoenix Park next May. By May, the EU will have grown to encompass 25 countries with almost 500 million citizens, but that's not where it's going to end. Romania and Bulgaria are currently in the throes of accession talks and hope to join the EU together in 2007. Turkey is also in the waiting room for EU entry, but it still has some way to go before meeting all the accession criteria.
Decided that the Greek Presidency Council last June that the Balkan countries in Southeast Europe will be provided with the prospect of ultimate membership of the European Union. Serbia, Montenegro, the former Yugoslavia basically, Albania. These countries, in time, and it will be some time obviously, but the perspective of European Union membership ensures that we don't recede to what we saw only 10 years ago in Yugoslavia, which was ethnic conflict on a scale that we hadn't seen since World War II.
Where does enlargement end? How far east do we push the EU border? And how will the EU relate to those countries which might always remain on the other side?
During the Irish presidency, in March or April of this year, we will have from the Commission the first draft of a wider neighbourhood policy. Because we need to decide what are the mechanisms of cooperation we wish to decide upon for other countries in our neighbourhood. And the reason why we need to do this is not because of some sort of expansionist political adventure. We need to do it because it's in our own interest to do it. We need security on our borders. We need good relations with our neighbours so that the prosperity and the progress we're making can be maintained and sustained in the future.
There's already a big tendency right across the European Union, and we see it possibly more strongly in this country than many others, to resist outsiders. There's a big build-up of prejudice against people who come to work in the European Union, whether as economic migrants, as refugees, as asylum seekers, and that's something that has to be taken on right across the European Union. That what has come to be known as Fortress Europe, Europe putting up barriers against the outside world, simply doesn't become a bigger Fortress Europe. And that would be really negative. It would stop the influx of ideas, of energy, of people, which is one of the most positive things about modern Europe.
the Irish presidency is happening at such an historically significant moment in the life of the continent of Europe. It is just an extraordinary thing that this little country on the western periphery of Europe is going to be in command when the pain, when the horrors of the last century are brought to an end, and when Eastern and Central Europe come back into the European fold. It really is quite an extraordinary moment for a small country like Ireland.
With every enlargement, the EU has grown in more ways than one. Having started out as a means to secure peace in mainland Europe by uniting the victors and vanquished of World War II with a common purpose, its influence now extends into every aspect of European life. And on next week's programme,
I bought myself a copy of the Maastricht Treaty. It was that thick and it was impenetrable.
What the difference between the Council of Ministers and the Commissioners, I wouldn't know either.
We two nice treaties, of course. One, because we didn't really understand it, or so we were told.
I'm very interested, but I hadn't got a clue.
If citizens are confused about Europe, it's not the fault of the citizens, it's the fault of Europe.
For further information, go to eu2004.ie.